This episode is brought to you by 180 Markets, where it is our goal to bring every individual, fund manager, family office, or any qualified investor access to Australian Stock Exchange capital raises. If you are ever interested in how to access ASX capital raises in a super simple way, 180 Markets is for you. The sign-up process is easy. You just upload your ID, proof of your investor status, and your current brokerage account information. The settlement of shares goes right into your existing account, and you can access our very next capital raise. If you're interested in free, easy access to thousands of ASX capital raises, including placements, IPOs, reverse takeovers, and more, check out 180markets.com.au. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets. Investors, we always talk about being on theme, on trend with what's going on in the marketplace. And one of the biggest trends out there is EVs, or electrical vehicles. And for those of you that don't know, it's not just the batteries themselves that's so important. It's all the inputs that go into it. And one of the biggest inputs is graphite. And what's even crazier is it's going to cause a huge supply-demand imbalance with huge demand over the next 10 years. And with us today, we have a company, Volt Resources, with one of the largest global projects out there for graphite. And we're joined by its managing director, Trevor Matthews. Trevor, with that introduction, welcome to 18 Minutes with 180 Markets.
Thanks, Greg, and good to be talking to 180 Markets today.
Fantastic. Hey, Trevor, everybody's got a story. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get to where you are today?
Sure. My background, actually, my qualifications are more in finance and accounting, and about over 34 years now ago, I got involved in the resources sector and started working in iron ore, actually, in the Pilbara. And even though I'm a finance and accounting person, I spent a lot of time in my career, particularly early on, out at actual mine sites or during construction phases of greenfield development projects. So quite apart from working at Rogue River back in the late 80s and early 90s, I also was involved in the development of the only silicon metal operation in Australia. I was in the senior team there. We're still operating in Kemerton in Western Australia. So that was during the construction and commissioning phase. North Parkes copper gold project in central New South Wales. I was part of the management team that developed that project, which at the time was the biggest mining project in almost 20 years in Australia. So that was a great experience. Also have worked in gold offshore in Indonesia and in Algeria along the way. And the finance and construction and commissioning and operations of a high pressure acid leaching plant, one of the first three in Western Australia. Went on from there into my role as managing director of Murchison Metals, where we developed a small scale iron ore exporting operation in the Midwest of WA, exporting between 1.5 and 2 million tonnes of iron ore for 5 years out through Geraldton. And working with Mitsubishi in a really large-scale joint venture, multi-billion-dollar financing development for port and rail infrastructure. Unfortunately, that didn't quite go the direction we're in. We're trying to coordinate, I guess, companies that had Japanese background, South Koreans and Chinese to work together. So pretty complex. And ultimately, we wound up selling the business for $325 million to Mitsubishi, which we thought was still a pretty good outcome in the context of pretty volatile iron ore markets at the time. Developed a mineral sands project in my last role, so all the way from feasibility study through to construction and operations. So I've got a lot of greenfield mine development experience, either as a senior in the senior team or as MD/CEO, funding for those projects and putting them into operations. And so looking forward to doing the same thing in the graphite space now with the projects that Volt has, and also working on the development of our gold projects as well.
Absolutely, and maybe that's a good segue into the Volt projects. And if you can just go over the the graphite project first, maybe just give everyone a little bit of an overview.
Sure. So our flagship project has been the Bunyu project in southeast Tanzania. It's the largest resource in Tanzania and one of the largest in the world as it currently stands. And we still have, significant exploration upside in that with that project. One of the great attributes about it is its location as well. It's only 140 kilometres away from a port in the south of Tanzania, Mtwara Port. There's a sealed road that runs virtually through the project area. So, great logistics and, both from a transport to port and also an export location. So we have offtakes in place with Chinese companies and also a small graphene company based in the United States. All the approvals are there. We've obtained our mining licenses, environmental permits. Our resettlement program has been approved by the government. So basically we're in a position, that it's development ready, and that's the phase that we've been in, is sourcing funding for this project. Fair to say the graphite market's been a bit tough over the last couple of years. There's been some oversupply back in 2019. Last year, of course, COVID caused a bit of disruption to, demand and progress, particularly in the EV space. But, we seem to be coming out of that really strongly right now. So, we continue to work on the funding for Bunyu. The other project that or operating mine that we're looking at acquiring is Zavaleski Graphite, which is based in Ukraine. Long life project, been around for 87 years. Some people say, oh, it must be just about, run down by now, but projects of that age go through a number of capital investment cycles. So, the plant and equipment, while it could do with some further investment at the moment, and that's the opportunity for us, is we're picking this project up very cheaply, and it does need some capital improvements along the way, but it is an existing operating supplier. It's got customers in Europe. It also has sold products into Japan, Taiwan, and some deliveries into the Middle East now. So it's got a customer base, fantastic logistics, being in Europe. It's the only mine of its kind in Europe. It's a large mine. It's got plenty of mine life left. I think it's just a great opportunity for Vault to leap ahead and become an owner or a controller. So we will acquire a 70% interest in this project or in this business, and become a graphite producer.
Right.
And, that'll put us about 2 years ahead of our peer group companies who are all aspiring to become producers, but are yet to be funded and go into construction and go to development. So that just positioned us so well for the coming growth in the battery and EV space in Europe, which is the fastest growing market sector globally, or in terms of battery plant construction or cell making, and also EV production.
Right. And absolutely. And I want to come back to the Ukraine project, but first, can we go back to Bunyu for a second? I think it's also, one of the interesting characteristics that we picked up on is that your chair, there's always sovereign risk when you're going outside of Australia. But for Vault, you have a very, very close connection through your chairman with the country. Can you just describe that a little bit? Because I think it's important for investors to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So our Vault's chairman is Simwe Kabanga. So Simwe was born in Tanzania. In fact, his sister and the rest of his family are still live in Tanzania. He's an Australian citizen now. He's been living in Australia for probably over 20 years. Simwe's an entrepreneur. In fact, started off in technology, but probably about 10 years ago started investing in mining projects, early stage, and has built up a bit of a portfolio of companies, and Vault is probably one of his key main investments in Australia in this space. So what Simwe brings is, he's obviously still got a good network in Tanzania, pretty good understanding of the way, the country works, and the way, Tanzanians sort of, as a a group of people think and operate. So, he brings some good relationships and not just within Tanzania. He's managed to develop those relationships through a lot of other parts of Africa. So, case in point is our acquisition of the Guinea gold projects came through a transaction that Asimwe facilitated. So, he's a pretty important part of us, being able to position ourselves to where we are today in Tanzania. And, we look forward to moving that project forward. But, I think also the company's broadening its thinking in terms of how we can proceed forward to be a global player in the graphite supply chain. And that's part of the rationale around also proceeding with this potential transaction in the Ukraine.
Absolutely. And on Bunyu, the way you're structuring it is it's basically you're de-risking the project in a couple of different stages. Can you just let the audience know about that as well, please?
Sure. Back in 2017, prior to that, the company was heading down a pathway of trying to develop quite a large-scale project, around about 170,000 tonnes per annum of graphite production. Probably all up development costs would be, with working capital and other costs, would have been around $200 million US. So, sort of looked at where the market was at right now, and the lithium-ion battery space was still an evolving and developing market from our point of view, and not particularly large at that stage. Traditional markets were fine, but reasonably well supplied. So bringing on a lot of production through a large-scale project seemed a bit risky to us and a bit difficult. So we decided to proceed forward with a smaller stage one, lower capex, lower funding requirements, probably less risk because you're operating a smaller scale facility. So your mining and processing is probably more manageable. And just recruiting people too as well, less numbers required. So the whole, training and development and commissioning and ramp up we saw as being lower risk. And then the plan would be, once we developed and had some operating experience with stage one, would be to go to market and also in the intervening period of time, complete a final bankable study on the stage two expansion and go and raise the capital, put in place the offtakes. And we've already put in place our approvals though, for stage two development. So one thing I should mention is, we have our environmental approvals in place, and also our mining licenses cover the stage two footprint and development. So we're able to use our pre-feasibility study as pretty much the basis for those approvals. So when we get there, we're not going to be held up with further development approvals. We can proceed pretty quickly through to funding and into construction and move to being roughly a 200,000 tonne per annum producer from the is our target for an expansion. So combining that with our potential acquisition in Ukraine would position Volt to be one of the global or major global suppliers in the graphite supply chain.
Absolutely, and I think that I know that we have to be careful with quoting potentials, but let's just say your market cap compared to the size of the target market, it's multiples and multiples of differentials. So plenty of upside there, if you will. In Bunyu, or of any of your projects for that matter, what would be your definition of success over the next 12 months? Like, what would you like to see as a company to say, that's well done?
Sure. Well, I think as far as Bunyu goes, being able to move forward and put in place the funding, the US $40 million that we're seeking to develop stage one, would be a great outcome. I think a lot of other companies have not been able to successfully make that transition. So in fact, none in our space to date. But we see opportunities leveraging off the Ukraine project actually to be able to de-risk Bunyu from the point of view of we're going to pick up a lot of operating experience as part of the Ukraine acquisition. As we said, customer base, access into Europe and the markets there, and cash flows as well from that business. So they're really important factors when financiers are looking at, or bankers are looking at, whether to provide funding for your project development. So I think Bunyoo funding, would be obviously a big tick. We want to complete the Ukraine acquisition because see that as being a pretty key part of our strategy now to become an early producer and really be a participant in the near-term development of battery anode materials through downstream processing. There are already plans in place of that business to move to that sort of production based in Europe into like I said before, the biggest growing market in the world for the last couple of years. And also an entry point into the North American market as well. It's not that far to ship products from the Ukraine across the Atlantic and into the United States as well. So we see some opportunities there. And clearly, the world outside of China is looking for alternative sources of battery anode material supply.
Definitely.
There's no one outside of China at the moment that's supplying the whole lithium-ion battery market. So, the opportunities for a project based in Europe, and there's not many of these mines and processing plants in the world outside of China. So your opportunity to actually acquire one is pretty limited. And, this has just been, I think, a great opportunity for Volt, and we're looking forward to ticking that box off. And then the other side, the other projects we're pushing forward are our gold exploration projects in Guinea, early stage, but we're just in a drilling program right now. We're doing auger drilling. That's a precursor to basically targeting your holes for your revert RC drilling program, which will proceed later this year. So, we think that the projects have great prospectivity. We on a number of different bases, not just, the fact that there's been some success with another company on exploration and now tenements are joined theirs, just based on the geology, artisanal workings, other nearby mines that seem to, and soil geochem and rock chip sampling all show, some pretty positive signals for us that we could have a pretty good outcome once we get into that deeper drilling in Guinea.
Absolutely. And that's like, I suppose, the way that we look at it also within Volt, the gold, you're really getting that for free at this point. I mean, there's really no value in the company itself. So anything you get is upside. So you could really have a monster on your hands with that as well, for sure. Just, before we get to the closing, I did want to just ask one question on the Ukraine acquisition, because I think that, obviously I can hear that, you're extremely excited about it. What do you think the market just doesn't seem to understand at this point? Because as you said, you're next to the biggest, EV market in the world. This is, production. There's a lot more there than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's a good question. I got to say, we were, as a company, and I'm sure our shareholders were disappointed with the reaction from the market to the announcement when we advised that we executed term sheets, and we're moving through, the next phase, which is due diligence and completion of final full form agreements, and there's a local regulator approval, which is reasonably straightforward. So there may be some hesitation around maybe completion risk, because we do have to actually sign up the binding agreements and settle the payments. I'm pretty confident we'll get through that. We've already started the due diligence process. I've been to site, met the selling shareholders, met the 30% shareholder that's continuing on. I've seen the project operating. It does need some investment, some improvement capital, but it is producing, and like I said, making small scale cash flows. Got some interesting upside with some other co-products in what is blue metal production and also garnet production going forward. So maybe there's some concerns about completion risk, but like I said, I'm pretty confident. Certainly, we're moving forward on the basis that we're going to complete in the near future. Funding, I think people need to understand that the first payment needed to settle it is US $3.75 million. So that's only $5 million Australian. That's all we need to fund it for the initial payment. The project business itself is paying its way, so we don't need to actually provide any working capital as such. But you know, our other thinking around funding is most of the improvement projects, or all the improvement projects, have an improvement to the bottom line. So it could be even debt funded, you know, once we complete the acquisition. So as far as the acquisition funding goes, like I say, not a large amount, and we're just looking at, you know, various options around debt and or equity for that funding as well. But I think I can say pretty confidently that, you know, that's not going to be an issue for us. The second payment, which is the equivalent of another 5 million Australian at 3.75 million US, for the last quarter, basically, of the year. So, you know, plenty of time to resolve how that funding comes together once we close the transaction. So perhaps the market's a little bit concerned about those couple of things. We need to communicate our strategy, you know, more broadly and widely. But I think if you, as you mentioned earlier on, if you compare Volt's market capitalisation with other participants in this space, looking at downstream processing, you know, there's a massive gap between our valuations and where those companies are. And I think we're positioning ourselves to be, you know, really well advanced, actually being a graphite producer and having the short-term capacity to go downstream, manufacturing battery anode materials in Europe. And you know, that to me is, you know, a great opportunity for Volt and its shareholders. So hopefully the market, well, I believe the market will eventually catch up, and you know, that'll be reflected in Volt's share price over a little bit of time.
Absolutely. Trevor, we like to keep these interviews short and sharp. Obviously, you have a great story. You know, you really are on, you know, again, you know, on this thematic of EVs, and graphite is a major input. Very hard to find, but when you do find it in a source of Volt, if you will, it's really, really exciting, and, you know, and it's not that far away. Do you have any closing words for the audience?
Yeah, I think, you know, Volt's position itself now, you know, to be a key player in the graphite supply chain, as we're talking about, and that means being part of the broader EV space, as well as, or EV market, you know, as being a participant in that area. You know, I think it's opening up other opportunities for us as well that people will start to see over time, and in the graphite materials supply chain. And that's not just solely about lithium-ion batteries and EVs. You know, graphite has other uses that are growing, like in fire retardant building materials. And of course, it's got its traditional markets, which is where Zavaleski Graphite supplies a lot of its material currently to its customer base in Europe. So, you know, building on that with the Bunyu development, you know, to position Volt as a globally significant player in the graphite supply chain. And then with what we see as a good hedge for Volt to be also have a gold business, and you know, looking to move that forward and look at opportunities around any further sort of gold developments that we might participate in. So, you know, more broadly, the whole battery mineral space is you know, it's a growing sector, as we know. So, you know, we see ourselves as being a key player in that sector.
Absolutely. Trevor, thank you very much, and definitely keep in touch.
Okay. Thank you, Greg.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching another presentation by 180 Markets. Don't forget, if you want access to thousands of ASX capital raises, head on over to 180markets.com.au, sign up, and get on board for our very next capital raise. Thanks for watching.